This lecture will talk about barriers, attitudes, and relationship building with families. When we think about barriers to teacher-family partnerships, we first start by asking ourselves, why do we have these barriers? Well, there are several different reasons that we think are really crucial in terms of why there are barriers. First of all, we have just human reactions. So, for example, the mom that was waiting to talk with me about a concern that she had. Her son had gotten in trouble at school, and I guess over the long weekend she decided that she didn't really like how I handled it, that her son told her that I was being very unfair, and she wanted to talk with me about it. And I had left town over the long weekend to go to a funeral. My husband's grandfather had passed away, so it was my first day back, and I'd been out for a couple of days, so I had sub-plans. And when you come back after having sub-plans, you don't know what state your room is going to be in, and I walked in early with my Starbucks in one hand and my umbrella in the other. It was that kind of day. And just about the last thing that I really wanted to see was a mom there with her arms crossed, glaring at me to talk about how she felt that sending home a note with the concern that her son had been very unkind to a classmate and rather rude to me, that was she just felt like that was very unfair, and that her son had told her that what I had said happened is not what happened at all. And I have to tell you, a totally human reaction. I said to her, I don't know what to tell you. This is what he said. This is what he did. This is what he said after I talked to him. And she backed down. She was like, well, I can see, yes, well, he shouldn't have done that. That was very disrespectful, and I'm surprised that he said that to his friend. But, on the whole, I wasn't even very nice about it. I definitely had a human reaction. And I would say that for me, there was a barrier with her, and probably for her there was a barrier with me, just on the basis of how that conversation went. And if if it had been a different kind of morning or just a different day, I would have been nicer about it. I would have been more patient. I would have been able to kind of just meet her where she's at and kind of think, well, it's her oldest child, who knows what he said. It's been days that she's been stewing on it. And I wasn't able to do that at all. All I was able to do was be frustrated that she was waiting for me when she knew I was coming back from a funeral. So when we talk about human reactions, the fact is that we are all very human. She's human too. It was her child. And really, she thought that maybe he was being picked on by the teacher, and she didn't know. She had a human reaction of protectiveness, so that's part of it. And then there's communication, which you can see in the example I just gave you also. It was, as I said, not my finest hour, and the way that I communicated to her, I was kind of terse. My voice was, I was speaking to her in a very kind of clipped manner like this, enunciating my words a little more than I would. It was clear that I was mad. And so communication stuff is part of it too. And the thing about communication that's really funny is you can communicate stuff that you don't even mean just through your own communication style. There are cultural issues around communication. Communication is this whole other field where you have lots of misunderstandings. And then external factors. Sometimes external factors can just be lack of contact with a teacher. Maybe by nature of how your job is structured and how their job is structured, if there's not a lot of contact, you never really know what they're thinking of you, and you can get that kind of stuff too. And then, of course, we talked about how there are these distinctions between mothering and teaching, and they're talked about in your book, about how we have these different role dimensions in terms of what we bring to the relationship, and that creates barriers too. My role as a teacher is to give to all 25 children something equally. I mean, maybe one child will need something different than another child, but to at least care about them equally and love them equally, even if I show that caring and that love and that attention and that education in a different way, because every child needs different things. But anyway, I'm not just thinking about the little boy that I started talking about in the beginning of the slide, I'm thinking about that little boy and the other little boy that he was picking on, and I'm thinking about the other kids that were watching it, that were expecting me to step in, and I'm thinking about, all these other kids. Well, that mom, she's just only thinking about her little boy. That's her job. And we have different jobs, so our roles are very different. And that creates a barrier too, because you want what you want for your kid, and the teacher wants what they want for all of the kids. So it's distinct. So barriers that are caused by factors in the relationship are these essential differences between teaching and parenting, as I already mentioned. It's just very different. And maneuvering over turf, that's an issue too. I know that sometimes I have had moments as a teacher where if another parent came in and let me know right away that they're a teacher too, and I should let them know if I need any help or suggestions, or there's something around being what I call the queen bee of your classroom, that it's like your little kingdom. It's like your fiefdom. And sometimes when parents come in and they want to give you helpful suggestions, we're not always receptive to that. Well, in the same way, they're not always receptive to our suggestions either. So it's really important to build a strong enough relationship to get through some of these barriers and to be able to trust one another. The issue of trust is really important, because if you trust someone, then you're more willing to hear their ideas, and that goes both ways. And differences in expertise too, that those parents are more of an expert in their child than you are, and we are more of an expert in what's happening in the classroom or educationally, what we want to accomplish. And sometimes those differences do come into play. I have to say that there have been times when I have really disagreed. I remember once I knew a little boy, and he wasn't in my classroom. I had his sibling, and then that child was in a different classroom, and he was the kind of child that from 50 yards away you could see probably had ADHD. He was old enough, he was already in elementary school, that the differences are pronounced. We don't make diagnoses of ADHD of 3-year-olds, but this child was not 3. This child was 9. And his hyperactivity component was so pronounced that you just could not, it was hard to see anything else. Anyway, because I was not his teacher, the mom came and talked with me and said, the school is really pushing me to get him on medication and to get, to do all of these things. And she said, I am not going to do that. He's going to outgrow this thing, and he's going to be fine. And I remembered thinking, oh my gosh, really? He's really struggling in school. He's struggling behaviorally. Some things are going to be really hard for him. And I heard one of the other teachers say about this child and this parent, like even the next year when this was still going on, and she said, oh, I think this is the worst mom I've ever seen, because that mom just staunchly refused to put that child on medication. And she said, well, he'll outgrow it. And do you know, as much as I dismissed what she said, and it wasn't my problem, it wasn't my child or my classroom, but she brought me into it, so I cared what happened. I tell you what, that kid grew up to be, he's a fine young adult, and he never took any ADHD medication, and whatever it was that was going on with him, it lasted several years, and he did outgrow it. Now, maybe she knew something that the rest of us didn't. Maybe she knew that he was experiencing some kind of anxiety disorder that was causing his ADHD, and that was something that not everybody was familiar with, or maybe this was a cycle that she had seen in her family. There are a lot of things that are connected to ADHD that we, such as panic or grief or anxiety or other things. So maybe she saw something in that child and that situation that the rest of us just didn't see. And lo and behold, she was right. Now, by the same token, there have been other times that I've thought, that I have not always agreed with a parent, and in terms of what I think should happen in the classroom. again, there are differences in expertise, but these are things that definitely do cause barriers. Barriers caused by emotional responses. We get emotional responses of both parents and teachers. We react to the other person's role, like in the story that I told you a couple slides ago. Some of the harmful emotional responses include jealousy, guilt, and resentment. Sometimes, especially with those little pumpkins, parents might react by feeling sad or jealous that they've missed out on a child's big moment. Learning to crawl, learning to walk, losing a tooth, really mastering potty training. There are a whole host of landmarks that happen in the early years, and sometimes we do see folks react in that way. Fear of criticism. I have to say that I have never really learned to enjoy constructive criticism. I've learned to receive it in a professional way and, maintain a calm and professional demeanor, but nobody likes criticism. So it's just important to know that sometimes when we tighten up and we feel stressed or nervous, that it has to do with fear of criticism. My best free advice in terms of maintaining a calm, cool, emotional response. I'm an arm crosser. When I'm confronted, I cross my arms in front of my chest, and that sends a very clear message that you're not willing to hear. So I try to take my hands and I put them down at my sides, and I reach for the seam of my pants or skirt and line up the inside of the palm of my hand, my middle finger or my ring finger, along the seam of my skirt or pants, so that way it keeps me from crossing my arms in front of my chest or doing some other such thing. Sometimes I'll cross my hands behind my chest and then I end up kind of looking downcast like a little girl, and I don't want to portray that either. So find the seam of your pants. It'll help you to be perceived as being open to the parent, and it also actually will help you hear what they have to say. Your physical stance can help you. Okay, other barriers caused by external factors: time. People get stressed, busyness, what we fill up our time with, our old ideas of parental involvement in families. Some parents might feel like, you know what, that's your job. I had a parent say to me once at back to school night, as we were just starting to talk about homework, which would be once a week for 20 minutes. And they said, we don't want our child, the parent raised her hand in the middle of back to school, we don't want our child to be loaded down with homework, and we don't want a teacher that's going to give a bunch of homework, because it's your job to teach the children in the classroom, not my job to teach those things for you at home. This is the middle of back to school night. And so what I said was, the homework that I'm giving, the 20 minutes every Monday, is something that is a school-wide policy, so it's not just me as a teacher, and in fact it's a county-wide policy. But if you feel like the homework that's coming home is creating an issue for you or your family, feel free to let me know individually. And I remembered thinking the whole time through back to school night, who are these people? Sometimes our old ideas of involvement get in there, and for them, they had an underlying fear that they were going to just get totally overwhelmed and flooded with homework, and that it was just going to be so bad. And so before they could even, since they came in with that fear, and that fear was so strong for them, they just couldn't even really hear what I was saying, which was that one very simple activity was going to come home, and it was going to take, 20 minutes tops once a week. Administrative policies sometimes create barriers. And then personal problems or style. There are some folks that I have really connected with, and there are some folks that I haven't. That's really a normal part of the teaching experience. What you have to know, though, is that every year that's going to happen. You'll never ever have a class where you connect really well with all of the families and they all seem to think like you or operate like you and do things the way that you think that you would do them. So some foundations of a successful partnership starts with teacher ideas and attitudes. So first of all, the concept of professionalism. You want to develop reciprocity and partnership with parents. And then I think having a strong sense of self is really key, because if you have a strong sense of self, then it's not so frustrating when things kind of go awry. Then then you're less likely to be defensive when something comes up. And having humility and approachability. And even if you're not feeling it, you should at least try to fake it and just really try to hear what folks have to say. Sometimes parents have really good ideas and really good points. Sometimes they're right. And if you are able to just step aside and hear that and reflect on it, sometimes you might have to say, I'm going to have to think about what you said. I appreciate you sharing it with me. I'll think about that. Compassion, respect for others, and trustworthiness are really important. I think trustworthiness goes to what happens in the teacher's lounge. We all need to vent and we all need to have support, but we don't need to vent and have support from like every other person in the building. I think one, trusted person to kind of give you their perspective. Was that me? That seemed kind of, do you think that's what she meant to say? I think having one person to troubleshoot that with is fine, but you don't want to be the person in the building that tells everybody about all a family's secrets. That's not, it doesn't help you, it doesn't make you look professional, it doesn't help the family, because sometimes what you could have is a family that's very stressed and a family that's, really not even interacting very well with other staff, and then they never really have another chance to have a fresh start or a fresh year if everybody's talking about them. Some external factors that support partnerships include having good support systems, administrative policies and practices that are helpful, and having good personal support. Sometimes a staff member, a teacher, might just need to hear, you know what? I know, sometimes they're a little bit difficult, but they're here, they're enrolled in our center, they've got 3 kids here, you're doing a great job, because, in every group of people, there's going to be someone maybe you don't mesh that well with, but it doesn't mean that they have to leave. It just means that we just have to say, well, we're going to do the best we can to meet this family where they're at and provide them with what they need. And we're more able to do that when we have kind of administrative support that says you're doing a great job, and you'll see that reflected in your teacher evaluation. And then the support of other folks in your lives. I mean, by all means, call your cousin and vent. Don't use real names, but just, when I said before, try not to have it all over the building. I do think that's important, but it's helpful if you have your own personal support too.